And that's not, and I'm not making any kind of conclusions or not trying to point to that. I just think that it's worth notating that how misguided that brother was from what the calculations actually is going to be. Now, if you're talking about a minor, yes, there is ways in which those funds can be directed towards the mother who would be a caretaker or holder of those funds, or even, administering those funds on the children. Because if the children are small, obviously that they're not going to be able to quantify a large amount of money at the time of the death of the father. But nonetheless, I just want to be clear here that there even are some guidelines as to how those funds should be cared for and should be administered as a Muslim living in this country. And I'm going to leave that for the scholars and some of the other knowledgeable people in the community. But I just want people to notate that the shares that have been designated in the inheritance calculator, this is from Allah. This is not something that we've come up with. This is not from the scholars. This is the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has described it in the Quran and in the Sunnah and in the Ahadith that we are referencing in this lecture. And this is important. You have to follow it. There's not options here. And if somebody disagrees, they're disagreeing with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala essentially. So, it's no shame on anyone on what percentage they're getting. This is the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants the funds distributed. I am going to move on to another scenario. This is rare. I think that just for, the purposes of knowledge, I think it'd be interested if a person has multiple wives. Of course, that's not legal in this country, but if you are in a scenario, or maybe you're in a different country in which that would be applicable. Sorry. We're going to go through the same thing. So 2 wives, 3 daughters, 1 son, full brothers and full sisters. I'm actually going to put 2 sons in here just to change it up, because I want to show the strength of the site and how it can take on different things. Do a calculate inheritance. So in this situation, wife 1 would receive 6.25%, wife 2, 6.25%. Basically, they're taking the wife's share. It wouldn't be increasing, but it would just be splitting it. Again, son 1, 25%, son 2, 25%. Daughters break down to 12.5%. Full brothers, full sisters, they're still out of the equation. So even if you don't have your parents alive at the time of your passing, your sisters and brothers still will not inherit from you. And that's worth noting as well. Your money will be exclusively used and distributed amongst your children. Now, I want to talk about one last scenario. What if you have no children? And there are many people in the community who do not have children, but may have, I think that'd be an exception if they have 2 wives and no children. So we'll play it safe. 1 wife. Let's just throw in 1 grandson. No, wait, we're going to have a grandson. That wouldn't make sense. Let's just throw in there for fun 1 grandmother. Let's say 3 brothers again. Let's say 3 sisters. So you don't have any sons, but I'm going to say your mother is alive, not your father. So 1 wife, 1 mother, 1 paternal grandmother, 3 brothers, 3 sisters. Who would get the money, or how would the money be distributed in this situation? The breakdown would be 1 wife would get 25%. So if you notice here, the wife's share went up significantly, based on the fact that there's no children. Yeah, double. The mother, 16.67%. So the mother is still in the equation. The full brother now is in play. Okay? And the sister is in play. So again, if you think of the breakdown, if you have no children, the mother still is going to get a significant portion. The wife will get the larger proportion, but the full brothers, 1, 2, and 3, will receive 12.96% each. The full sister would be 6.48% each. And even after you do these calculations, it tells you how we've come up with this. So the calculation step, the mother blocks the paternal grandmother from receiving any share. So the paternal grandmother, because we actually put that into the scenario, is out, based on the fact that the mother is alive. So if the mother had passed, then it would put her in play. The wife gets the prescribed share of 1/4. That's a 2A rule, and it references the rules. The mother gets the prescribed share of 1/6, Rule 6B as well, in this scenario. Distribute the remaining shares according to the relative priority. The joint tesbia and a full brother and full sister come into play. So your brothers and sisters can inherit from you, but it'd be based on this scenario if you have no children, and your father passed and your mother's still alive, but your grandmother would still be out of the equation. And even at the bottom here, when you do your calculate, it says non-Muslim relatives are not eligible for inheritance. They might, however, receive, I'm not sure what that is, so I won't get into it. So non-Muslim, and I talked about that earlier, so that's if you have a son who's a non-Muslim, God forbid, he cannot inherit from you. And his equation would be out. If you have a wife, which is also something that can occur, where if your wife is not Muslim, she will not be able to inherit from you. I think that's a very relevant point that we need to understand as Muslims. I'm not speaking from the standpoint of a scholar. I'm just telling you how the calculation breakdown. So you need to account for that in your will, knowing the fact that in the state of Arizona, you know, if you don't have a will, then it would complicate things. Knowing the fact that she's your wife, even though she's not a Muslim, she would be able to be the executor of your funds and be responsible for a lot of your funds. So you need to consider that. If the wife is expecting a child, what about that situation? It says here at the bottom, if the wife is expecting a child delivery, then the baby will receive their share. So even if the baby's not born, then they need to be calculated into the inheritance. And I'm not sure about the exact time of when that baby's, in terms of when the baby's in the womb and those complications. So that would be something I would encourage you to get more information if that applies to you. And then lastly, relatives not in the above list are not among the standard heirs. So this goes into a lot of detail, so full heirs and full cousins. But if you have a relative, like a third cousin or something, then they are not standard, and they are not eligible for inheritance. So this goes through 29 inheritors, basically going all the way to full cousins, to paternal cousins, grandsons, full cousins, grandsons, full nephews, you name it. It has it listed here, and if it's not on this list, then it'd be difficult to understand how anybody other than that would be able to inherit based on this. So this more or less is kind of the breakdown of what I wanted to share today. And this is if you have free time, not to say that you should waste time on the site, but if you're really interested in understanding the subject, you can run different scenarios and apply the rules and apply how your inheritance is calculated, and I would encourage everyone to do that.
Does this also mean that in a major event, you should be changing your will all the time? So your father dies, you change your will?
That's a good question. The question is, if an event happens, a life-changing event, do you need to be updating and changing your will? I would say absolutely. So the will, without being ironic, needs to be a living document. So it needs to be something that is revised. It needs to be something that the people who are administering the will or are going to be the executors of the provisions in the will need to be aware of that. So if I have a new child, then obviously the distribution is going to change. If my mother passes, then the distributions are going to change. If my wife passes, then the distributions are going to change. So you need to designate, and I've actually done that in my will, and I'm going to scroll down here. I've designated that in bold here. Please refer to Schedule C. It's actually a document that's similar to the Islamic calculator on how the distribution of my estate should be handled. So I have it broken down into my current situation as of now. So I have my father receiving 14%, my mother receiving 14%, my wife receiving 11%, and then my daughter's receiving 29%. But I've also notated in my will, at least, I've said that if any of these things changes, I want the executors of my wealth in my provisions to go off of the Schedule C, which is basically the same thing as that website in terms of distributing the funds. So I've attached that as a document at the end. It's basically, it goes through the same situations. It's just not written out on the website, but it basically guides the person to say, this is what I want you to follow when I die. If the situation that I've listed in terms of my remaining heirs is not accurate at that time. So, yes, that's a good question, and that's something to also consider. I'm going to jump back to my last section here because there's another piece of this that I want to get into some details on. Just bear with me for a moment. So I dictate the names of the individuals, being my father all the way to my mother and my wife and my daughters. And then I also have a portion here, we've talked about this, but I basically have said, I direct that no part of my residue or remainder of my estate shall be inherited by any non-Muslim relative. So a non-Muslim can actually, a person may be Muslim in your family now, but they may change to become a non-Muslim. Again, God forbid that would happen to any of us. So I've designated in this section that if that person who's listed becomes a non-Muslim, then I'm directing that no inheritance be directed towards them. So I'm kind of covering my base there on that situation. Should I die as a result of murder, I direct that the adjourned murderer, principal, or accessory in the murder shall be disqualified to receive any part of my estate. That is also something that is permissible, so you can put that in there. That would be an odd scenario, but again, you want to be prepared. Who knows what's going to happen in the future? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always encouraging us to think about death. That the wise individual is the one who's always considering death. And there's a hadith that talks to something to that effect. So we know what's going to happen. كُلُّ نَفْسٍ ذَائِقَةُ الْمَوْتِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that in the Quran, which is every soul will taste death. So let us sit now and start to prepare for it. And this document is just the first step, but I'm really, really encouraging everyone to take the time to do this. And you may die tomorrow. Who knows? If I die tomorrow, at least my last breath, hopefully I'll be able to say, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. And I'll also have the peace of mind to say, I've made those preparations. That document is out there. That document actually, for me personally, has been sent via email to multiple email addresses of my family, as well as other caretakers. So I know that that document is out there, and it can be retrieved in the event that I no longer am here. Lastly, there is a section here in terms of mine that I direct and devise that any fetus conceived before my death whose relationship qualifies to the heir shall be considered as an heir. If the following condition is fulfilled, the fetus should be born alive with 365 days of my death. I further direct and devise that whenever there exists a fetus who may become an heir according to the section, the distribution of the residue and remainder of my estate after the execution of Articles 4 and 5 shall be delayed upon after the birth of fetus. I won't keep reading it, but again, the assistance that I received from a Muslim attorney on this was paramount. He went through every detail. And this is a great template. I'm happy to share it with whoever wants it in the community, where you basically just change the name and go through the inheritance, and I can help anyone with that. But there are so many situations that you have to account for. Let's say you were to be married and you have children and your wife gets pregnant and then you were to pass. Again, you want to be prepared for these things. Lastly, I have a situation or a section here, and this is part of the state of Arizona, where you would sign, you'd put your name, and then you would have a section for your two witnesses. And again, I would encourage everyone to get this notarized. That would be another source of protection for yourself, so that things are documented properly and there is no discrepancy that would end up in a court. And then lastly, there's some open sheets here where you can list your assets, list your liabilities, list your college savings, your retirement accounts, investments, bank accounts, all those things. Is encouraged to put in a will. It's not a requirement, but I would want people to be able to find where my funds are. So if I have loans, if I have money that I owe to someone, I'm going to put it in here so that the executors of the will can take the necessary means to pay those individuals. Same thing if you have assets. A lot of us have funds and investments and things that are designated in different places, maybe in different parts of the country, or even in different countries or lands or other things that we own. So you need to list that, because you'll be surprised. There are many people who pass, non-Muslims, and they have to hire investigators who come in and find these things. And that can be very time-consuming and expensive. There was even a scenario that my father had shared with me in which a person had passed, but he had made no provisions, no will, and he was a wealthy man, but it took so long to find the wealth, and to find the access, and to find the passwords, and to find the deeds of land that he owed, or that he owned, that by the time